Okay, everybody. Hodu Ladonai. Let's get started again. Let's begin again. A new beginning, another beginning. Hodu Ladonai. Give thanks to the Lord, Yahweh. Hodu Ladonai. One announcement. There's a little basket back there if anybody would like to make a contribution for the breakfast. It goes to the youth group, right, Todd? Which was pretty nice this morning. Anytime you have hash browns for breakfast, it's like you're living lavishly. So anybody that wants to make a contribution, even if you didn't have breakfast and you want to make a contribution to the youth group, the youth group was out there serving us and taking care of us. So, okay, now this time, we will talk about the new creation in the Gospel of John. There's a little bit of an echo, or is it? I don't know. How does it sound out there?
It's okay.
It's all right. That's good. Okay. And I wanted to quote a few Trinitarian scholars that also recognize that the author of the Gospel of John is introducing a new beginning, a new creation. Look at three authors here. And these guys are respected commentators. F.F. Bruce, he was one of the deans of biblical commentating in his time. No, he wrote before 2018. That must be a reprint. But he's since now passed on. But here's what he says, right? His commentary on the Gospel of John, a verse-by-verse exposition. He says, it is not by accident that the gospel begins with the same phrase as the book of Genesis. In Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, introduces the story of the old creation. Here, talking about John 1:1, here it introduces the story of the new creation. Okay, exactly right. Okay, but he's a Trinitarian. Another one. Okay, that's F.F. Bruce. Now here's N.T. Wright, a very well-recognized British scholar on the lecture tour, writes books like he can write, he's one of these guys that can write a 800-page book on a weekend sort of thing. Here's what he says in an article, what John really meant. The gospel in the new temple. He sees the presence of God and Jesus being in the presence of God is kind of a new temple. He says, John's opening move is, of course, bold. Are you really sitting down to write a new Genesis? Yes, replies John, because that is the truth to which I am bearing witness. I'm telling a story about something that has happened in which heaven and earth have come together in a whole new way, about the fulfillment of the Creator's purposes for His creation. Right, so he recognizes that the beginning of the Gospel of John is introducing something new, a new creation, he even calls it. And then Leon Morris, who wrote another commentary on the Gospel of John, Gospel according to John, very well-respected Trinitarian scholar, he writes, John is writing about a new beginning, a new creation. So he uses words which recall the first creation. He soon goes on to use other words which loom large in Genesis 1, such as life, verse 4, and light, and darkness. Genesis 1 described God's first creation. John's theme is God's new creation. Now, if you go online and you just Google new creation in the Gospel of John, you'll see a lot popping up where both laity and scholars recognize that this gospel is presenting the new beginning, a new creation. And remember, new creation, I'll probably say this a few times, because sometimes people say new creation and they think that means God's going to demolish this current earth. Give it a zap with a nuclear bomb, or, everything dissipates. That's not what new creation is in the Bible. It's renewal. It's the renewal of creation. That's the new creation. It's not a demolition of the atoms that we currently have and then, something different all created again. It's renewal. So it's amazing. When I first open these commentaries and I see, these guys recognize it. The problem is they don't remember what they said. As they go to the next paragraph, They forgot that they said this beginning is the new beginning in the man Jesus, and they interpret the rest of the prologue of John's gospel as if it's referring to the Genesis creation. They get that second divine figure back there somehow involved in the Genesis creation. And like I say, I think they just forgot what they just said. It's because our minds are, all of our minds are that way. We've got our presuppositions, and we read something, and our presuppositions either block or inform us about what we're reading. Now, I suggest that they were right, and they should have just continued with what they were saying, that this is a new beginning, a new creation. And I think that in the Bible, we can see that the God of the Scriptures promises a renewal, redemption. See, redemption is new creation. And God is not giving up on his plan to have human beings dwelling on earth, which he originally intended. Remember Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, 27? Let us make man in our own image, and he will let him rule over fish of the sea, right? And over the earth, over his creation. So this is his intention. Unfortunately, to say that, and I've heard prominent pastors say this, they see a new creation in the Bible, and they think that God is going to totally demolish everything and then, somehow make a new creation. But it's kind of poking your finger in the eye of God by saying, hey, God, I don't like this creation. I don't like this. I don't like this situation. I want to escape it. I want to be somewhere else. This is not biblical philosophy. Biblical philosophy, as we mentioned last night, is resurrection from the dead. It's not escape. It's not a disembodied escape somewhere else. I recognize the beauty and the perfectness, in a sense, of the creation. Remember, when God created, he said he saw it was good. It was very good. It was good. Now, we know that sin has come in, and we might call this, I'll probably use this term again, there's a futility curse, right? It's not, God didn't want it to always continue with sin. So there's a deterioration. There's a futility curse. But the Bible says it's that this earth is not irredeemable. Quite the contrary. It is redeemable, and God promised that he would redeem this earth. That's what we're talking about with the new creation, right? Through the man Jesus Christ, God is bringing about that new creation. Okay, so this is his specialty, to bring about the new. Isaiah chapter 65, for behold, I create new heavens, new earth. It's not a total new one, it's a renewed. The former things shall not be remembered or come into mind, but be glad and rejoice forever, in which I create. For behold, I create Jerusalem a rejoicing and her people a joy. You see, there's a change in Jerusalem's circumstances. It's not like got rid of Jerusalem. It's a change in the circumstances. Isaiah 66, for as the new heavens and the new earth, which I will make, shall remain before me, says Yahweh, so shall your descendants' name remain. Okay, this is the Israelite people. So we have a promise in the scripture that death and the futility curse will be overcome, as described in the early chapters of Genesis, through sin of man. I kind of just mentioned this. Death, the futility curse, came upon humanity in creation. But look at Romans 5:15. For if many died through one man's trespass, right? Death came upon man because one man sinned, and death has come through one man's trespass. Much more have the grace of God and the gift in the grace by that one man, Jesus Christ, abounded for many. So as death and the futility curse came through one man, the redemption or the healing, the renewal comes through the one man, Yeshua HaMashiach. Jesus is the name of the human person. Christ is the title of the human person, abounded for many. So it comes through one man. This is what the scriptures are saying. And I wanted to note that Many new beginnings, many of the new creations that God has brought about in the biblical narrative are through one person. Here are some examples: the flood and Noah. We have the whole world perished. Doesn't mean in the days of Noah that the earth was disintegrated, but it was destroyed by the waters of the flood. But God did not spare the ancient world, but preserved Noah, one man, a herald of righteousness, with 7 others when he brought a flood upon the world of the ungodly. An earth formed out of water, and by means of water, through which the world that then existed was deluged with water and perished. Okay, see, the old world was said to have perished, just like our current situation will be destroyed when the new comes. But it doesn't mean that the earth is totally gone. And the last reference, 2 Peter 3:13, but according to his promise, it's God's, we are waiting for new heavens and a new earth in which righteousness dwells. It's a renewal, a renewed earth in which righteousness dwells. So through one man, right, the earth was gone. There's no life, no human life on this planet except for Noah, one man, and his descendants. Through that one man, the new came. Another new beginning through one man, Abraham. Isaiah 51:2 is admonishing Israel. And he says, look to Abraham your father and to Sarah who bore you, for he was but one when I called him, that I might bless him and multiply him. You see, God was using one man, Abraham, to bring about his renewal. That people is going to be the channel through which salvation comes, through which renewal comes. One man. And Moses is another, I think, example of a new beginning that comes through one man. Israel is in slavery in Egypt. God chooses one man, Moses, and says, you're going to bring my people out of Egypt. And he brings them through the Red Sea. Like I said, it's a parallel to the creation account. The redemption of Israel out of Egypt is a new creation. It's the creation of Israel as a nation, as the people of God, even as God's son. This is the first time in the Bible where God says, Israel is my firstborn son. Right? It's a new beginning. And we mentioned Exodus chapter 12, where Israel is now supposed to start their calendar. This is your first month. You've come into being in this month. So these renewals, God has worked through one person, one human being to bring them about. For Israel's prophets and people, all these biblical examples looked forward to the ultimate new creation, the consummation, the removal of death, and the futility curse that came through Adam. And for Israel's prophets and people, this ultimate new creation was to come with the Messiah. This is what I believe the Gospel of John is telling us. The new creation has begun with this one man. The Jews believe that, among other things, when the Messiah comes, the resurrection of the dead comes. Well, resurrection from the dead is new creation. Again, when we wake up from the resurrection and we draw our first breath, the new has begun. We're going to rejoice. I'm going to start to explore. One of my kids told me recently, well, it'd be kind of boring. There's no death in the next age. What? Okay, death does make life, it makes you consider your days and so forth. But imagine being raised immortal and you have all the time that God wants to give us to create, to explore, to learn. All these things are going to be part of the age to come. It won't be boring. Now, examples of new creation in John's gospel. A few examples that I think help us see that, okay, yeah, that's what this gospel writer is doing. He's telling us the new has come through various ways. One way is through the language he uses. John 1, we're going to look at more specifically, God willing, in the afternoon. But a few other examples, and I just picked a couple of them. The phrase, for instance, it is finished. Jesus, when he's on the cross, says, it is finished. And the day before he was crucified, he says, I have finished the work which you gave me to do. That's John chapter 17, verse 4. He's praying to the Father, I have finished the work which you gave me to do. And then, as I mentioned, he's on the cross and he says, it is finished. I suggest, and not only me, okay, I got this from another Trinitarian commentating, that these words echo Genesis chapter 2, verses 1 to 3. When God completed the creation of the cosmic order that we are familiar with, thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. Okay, there's a parallel with this idea of completing work, finishing the work. And it's, by the way, it's on the 6th day, it's the day before the Sabbath, that Jesus was crucified and that God finished the work. Okay, Jesus is hanging on the cross, I believe, on a Yom Shishi, we say in Hebrew, 6th day of the week. That's when he died, and the work was finished. On the first day of the week, Genesis creation, right? First day of the week, day 1. Well, in John chapter 20 and verse 1, Jesus is raised from the dead on the first day of the week. This, I believe, is another allusion to the book of Genesis. And Jesus was raised to new life on the first day of the week. Actually, the beginning of the Gospel of John chapter 1 even numbers its days. On the next day, then on the third day. And it's perhaps even there an intentional parallel to the Genesis creation. Okay, so language and the phrases are parallel between John and the book of Genesis. Now, I mentioned this one already, in the garden. We talked about, it's only in the Gospel of John where it says, in the place where he was buried, there was a garden. That's only the Gospel of John, right? And then Genesis 2:8, Yahweh God planted in a garden in Eden in the east, and there he put man whom he had formed. A man and a woman in a garden, and we see the same thing at the end of the Gospel of John, right? There's Magdalene, Mary Magdalene, she's a woman. Woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you seeking? And then she thinks he's a gardener. I think this is an apparel. We kind of recognize, okay, here's a man and a woman in a garden in both John and Genesis. Another way in which the Gospel of John author is presenting to us that this is the new creation is through the signs, the miracles that Jesus performed. Jesus did many other signs, writes the Gospel of John, but these are written that you might know that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. And like I mentioned yesterday, the title Son of God does not mean God the Son. This is a Jewish idea. Israel is the firstborn son of God. David's descendant as the king of Israel is the Son of God. Right? You and I are sons of God. So it's a title, a metaphorical title, calling God Father. You know, it's really a privilege to be able to call God Father. You know, in the Muslim world, they don't. They don't have that intimacy idea of God being concerned for human beings. God is more aloof. They don't think of God as Father in the Muslim world. We owe this to the Jews, because in the Hebrew Old Testament, God is Father. We can call God our Father. Why? Not because we ontologically are the same substance of God or something like that. No, it's showing relationship. It's a metaphor showing relationship. He's concerned for us. He directs us. He disciplines us. He grants us an inheritance. Let him rule over the earth, okay, the creation. So this is why God can be called Father. That you might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. Here's why he's writing these signs. Let me explain a little bit or suggest a couple of signs that show us that Jesus is bringing about new creation. The first miracle, the water to wine. In the Old Testament, wine in its plentiness is a symbol of God's blessing upon mankind. Of course, not to be abused or misused. But we see many places in the Scripture, just about every prophet uses this metaphor. When the vine's flourishing, this is a sign of God's blessing. When it languishes, futility curse. A couple of examples. One here, the first way that wine is used is a sign of languishing. Isaiah 24. The earth mourns and withers, the world languishes and withers, the heavens languish together with the earth. It's the futility curse. The earth lies polluted under its inhabitants, for they have transgressed the laws, violated the statutes, broken the everlasting covenant. Therefore a curse devours the earth, and its inhabitants suffer for their guilt. Therefore the inhabitants of the earth are scorched, and few men are left. The wine mourns, the vine languishes, the merry-hearted sigh. Okay, so when things are bad, when man is in the wrong relationship with God, the wine mourns, the vine languishes. But you have the reversal of that in the book of Isaiah. On this mountain, Yahweh of hosts will make for all peoples a feast of rich foods, a feast of wine on the lees, of rich foods full of taste, of wine on the lees, well refined. Notice even death being vanquished gets paired with the idea of a plenteous wine. He will swallow up death forever, and the Lord God will wipe away tears from all faces, and the reproach of his people he will take away from all the earth, for Yahweh has spoken. You see the combination of even swallowing up death, ridding the earth of death with the plenteous production of wine. One Bible commentator says this about the water to wine. This is the first miracle that Jesus did in the Gospel of John, changed water into wine. And commentators recognize this as a creation act, they'll even say. But we can see it's a new creation, recreation, renewal. One Bible commentator says vineyards and wine exist at every turning point in redemptive history. You know what the first thing Noah did after the flood waters started to abate? First thing was, he made an altar. Second thing was, he planted a vineyard. So wine and the vineyards are in every turning point of redemptive history. All right? And they represent God's plan for creation brought to consummation of God's desire for his people to experience joy and happiness. Wine is consummated creation. Now, we might not think of that necessarily in America where it gets abused so much. But in Israel it is. Wine is used in the religious ceremonies. Why? Because God didn't just give us water. He gave us this sweet, fragrant, colorful, right? It's the sign of God's blessing upon us. And this commentator wrote his doctoral thesis on this whole idea of that first miracle being an evidence of God's recreation. Okay, so this is the first miracle of Jesus in the Gospel of John. Notice Matthew. He says, I tell you, this is Jesus speaking at the Passover ceremony, and there's wine involved in the Passover. I shall not drink again of the fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom. Consummated creation. The new creation has come. Okay, another miracle, another sign that Jesus did, which is evidence of renewal, of recreation. The lame walk and the blind see. This is the hope of the prophets. It's not a total demolition of all the atoms on the earth, but it's a renewal, it's a recreation. The prophet Isaiah, again, the eyes of the blind shall be opened, the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then shall the lame man leap like a deer, and the tongue of the mute sing for joy. Now, not only was there never an Israelite prophet who simply spoke and a lame man got up, or healed a blind person, but there was never a prophet that did either of those miracles. No prophet, no Israelite prophet. It's understood that when that happens, when the original intention of God for man's eye to see is renewed, when the original intention of God for man's legs to be able to walk and run is renewed, that's the Messiah. He's come. That's the Messianic age. That's the renewal. That's the redemption. Okay? Now, it's also very interesting to note, I might say this again later, the Gospel of John is the only gospel that records any miracle that Jesus did in Jerusalem. Think about it. In the Synoptic Gospels, all the miracles, none of them in Jerusalem. One little exception in the book of Matthew. I'll maybe mention it. One verse in the book of Matthew. talks about Jesus healing the blind and the lame on the Temple Mount in the book of Matthew. One verse. But basically the miracles that Jesus did in Jerusalem, they're only in the Gospel of John. He healed a lame man at the pools of Bethesda on the north side of the temple. By the way, that pool is still there. Archaeological excavations have found the remnants of it. He healed a blind man on the southern side of the Solomonic city, the pool of Siloam. Okay? Only the Gospel of John describes these miracles done in Jerusalem. What I'll suggest later is that John records that for us because he tells us that Jesus' own did not receive him. I'm going to suggest that in the Gospel of John, Jesus' own are the Judeans. He was received in Samaria. He was received in Galilee. They wanted to make him king. He was received in Transjordan. These are Israelites, but Jesus was a Judean. He was of Judah, the tribe of David. That's his own. So when he goes to Jerusalem and he heals the lame man near the pools of, at the pools of Bethesda and the blind at the pools of Siloam, and then he raises the dead, Lazarus, that's in the Jerusalem vicinity, at Bethany, just on the crest of the Mount of Olives. This is a testimony that he's the promised son of David, that brings in the new creation, that brings in this redemption of creation, right? Then the dead are raised up. Okay, that's Lazarus. And then when Jesus is about to come and raise Lazarus from the dead, Martha testifies. She says, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is coming into the world." I believe that with the Messiah's coming, that renewal would happen. By the way, there's a few other things too that the Jews believe will happen when the Messiah comes, but we'll leave those out. But the big one is resurrection from the dead and this healing. See, this is new. This is renewal. This is recreation. So somebody reading this, a Jew reading this, would say, this guy, the author is telling us that Jesus Christ brings the healing of the blind, brings the great expectation of the prophets that the lame would leap for joy, brings the great expectation of the prophets that the dead would be raised. He's the Messiah, the Son of God. Now there's a problem. What's the problem? We still got lame and blind. We still got dead. We still got people that are sick. So how could he be Messiah? That age hasn't come. Hang on. I think I have a little bit of an answer to that. Probably the right one. We'll see. Okay, so to sum up, here's another Trinitarian commentator from a teacher at Bethel Seminary in Minnesota, right? But I think they have a campus in San Diego too. And she writes in her article called Creation's Renewal in the Gospel of John. Okay, she recognizes that this is what the author is trying to tell us. She writes this: the notion of recreation, right? It's a renewal, supported by echoes of Genesis chapter 1 and 2. They're echoes, it's not directly describing Genesis, would not only have been understandable to John and his audience, but would have fit well a first century Jewish frame of reference, especially in relation to Jewish eschatological views. What she's saying is that Jews would have expected this, that when the Messiah comes, the blind would see, the lame would walk, the dead would be raised. It would be understandable to a Jewish reader in the first century that this is what is being declared by this author, that the new has come. Look at a couple of other parallels from other New Testament books of this idea of a regeneration to come. Probably the best one is Matthew 19:28, when the apostles ask, okay, what's up with us? You know, we followed you, left everything. What do we get in the kingdom? And Jesus says, truly I say to you, in the new world. Lots of different translations on that verse. And you look at what it is, see here in the middle, this word here in Greek, it can be rebirth, regeneration, renewal, renovation. See, the Jews expected it. That's what that prior author meant. In the Jewish eschatological understanding, it would have been acceptable, would have been understandable, that they understood that the next age to come. See, the Jews don't talk about going to heaven. This, like I said yesterday, this is one of the things that helped me. The Jews don't talk about this mystical, ethereal, wispy, disembodied heaven. Hope is resurrection from the dead in the kingdom, in the age to come. And you can see that as well in the New Testament. I say to you, in the new world, in the next age, in the regeneration, Jesus says, when the Son of Man shall sit on his glorious throne, you who have followed me will also sit on 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. Gomer Pyle, remember him? Surprise, surprise, surprise. That's going to be a surprise to many Jewish people that those apostles are sitting on 12 thrones, ruling, and it's the judge idea as a administrator ruler. In John's gospel, now here's my answer, right? So we still got death. We still got sickness. We still have the blind. This is one of the things the Jewish people will say today. Jesus can't be Messiah. Number one, why? Messiah is not God, okay, in the Jewish world. Sorry, it's just not on the radar. It's a perversion. Okay? We can tell that this is not Jewish. It didn't come from Jerusalem. This idea, right? The word of the Lord comes from out of Jerusalem, not from Cappadocia. Cappadocia is in Turkey, where certain philosophers in the late 4th century made God into 3 in 1. Okay, it doesn't come from. This is foreign. This whole idea that God, or even before that he was the Logos was some secondary God. Okay, it doesn't come from Jerusalem. It comes from outside of the land of Israel, easily recognizable as foreign. But the other main reason that Jesus can't be Messiah is, sorry, still death, still sickness. Here's what the Gospel of John is saying. Here's evidence. I'm giving you evidence that Jesus is the Messiah, and it's real evidence. He raised a man from the dead. He healed the blind. He healed the lame. He gave us a taste. God is saying, that's my man right there. He's given us evidence that he is the one designated that will eventually, okay, maybe you can say I'm cheating a little bit to say eventually, but I think this was God's plan, who brings it to consummation. We got a little taste, but it's enough evidence to stand back and say, wow, this is it. There's a little bit of a parallel with David in the Old Testament. People had enough evidence that David was the chosen Messiah, king, designated king, Mashiach, chosen Messiah of God. But he's running around in caves, hiding in the desert. But we still had evidence that he's really the Messiah. And this is a lot what 2 Samuel is about. The second part of 1 Samuel is if people acknowledge that David is the king designated by God before he's actually sitting on the throne in Jerusalem. God gave us evidence. The little boy goes out and kills the giant, right? And he's like successful in everything. God gave evidence that David's the king. But people had to decide, when he's out there in a cave in Adullam, he's running from Saul. Is that the king? He runs into a guy by the name of Nabal, right? What's Nabal's reaction? This guy's not the Messiah. He's not the designated king. His wife, Abigail, much more aware of the circumstances. She gets on her knees. She says, we know you're the king. Okay, that's a lot what the 2 Samuel is about. Before David's sitting on the throne, you had to decide. You had evidences. Now it's up to the persons to make the decision this is him or not. I think that's the parallel to the Gospel of John. Here's the evidence. The whole life of Jesus, culminating in his resurrection from the dead, in which people saw him flesh and bone. Okay, but the other things we just talked about, the lame, the blind, okay, he gave us evidences. We got the sample, testimony. He's the one. Okay, so that's it. That's kind of my answer to the Jewish question. Where's the kingdom? How come it's not here? Jesus didn't just come along and say, okay, when I come back, I'll raise the dead, I'll heal the blind, I'll fix the lame man's legs. Just wait a little bit. He didn't do that. He said he did it first. Of course, we know it's God working through him, just as Acts chapter 2, verse 22 says. Jesus Christ is a man attested by God through the miracles that God did through Jesus. Okay? So it's done by God through Jesus. But we got evidence. All right? It's not just believe me, when I come back I'll do it. No. We have a historical record with eyewitnesses. Do we believe those eyewitnesses? I think it's a reliable record. Okay, so in a nutshell, I think there's good reason to understand the Gospel of John as presenting Jesus as the facilitator, the one man through whom the new creation comes. Just like Noah was the one man through whom the renewal came. Just like Adam was the one man through whom all of the world first started. All things came through Adam. And we're going to see a similar statement about Jesus. All things came through him. All right? We'll stop there. Any comments or questions? How are we doing on time? Deborah, how did I do? I said I was going to be done before 12. So we did it. Okay, any comments before we take a break? I think lunch is scheduled for 12:30, is that right? We'll ring the bell, okay. Deborah.
What's the reference for the verse connected to the dead or raised up?
The reference, Deborah's asking, what is the reference for the verse?
The dead or raised up.
It's in really two places in the Bible. It's from Isaiah. Yeah, the first reference is in the Old Testament, in the book of Isaiah, chapter 35. Okay, somebody want to find the exactly verse. But also remember when John the Baptist sent to Jesus, and John is in prison, and he's languishing, and he's about to get his head cut off, and he's wondering, excuse me, when the Messiah comes, he's supposed to bring in a kingdom and resurrection, or the kingdom. And he says, are you the one, or shall we look for another? He sends servants to Jesus. And Jesus sends back to him, tell John, and he quotes from the book of Isaiah, the lame are standing up, the blind receive their sight, the dead are raised, right? That's your evidence that he's the one. So that reference somebody else can look up to, maybe in a concordance or something too, where Jesus answers the question of John the Baptist. So he basically quotes from Isaiah chapter 35. Matthew 11. Because he's ushering in that kingdom, right? But he's only giving us a sample, just a taste of it, enough to say, yep, that's the one. Okay, I must have presented a more convincing case the second session than the first one, because there are a lot more questions in the first session. Well, let's take a break then, and we're coming back, and we're going to plan to start in on John chapter 1. We'll take the first 5 verses in the afternoon session at 2 o'clock. That's going to be a tough one, because everybody eats lunch, and it was always, when I was a teacher, it was always the hardest to teach right after lunch. People, you're digesting and a little more not aware. But we'll give it the old college try. Okay, that's the plan for this afternoon. We'll start in John chapter 1, and we'll look at, okay, how can you say that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God? How can that be the man Jesus?